This week on the Dawg Show, the South Carolina Gamecocks travel to Athens, Georgia to play the Georgia Bulldogs. So grab you a cold beverage and let's go. All right, guys, let's jump right in today. Before we get into the South Carolina game, let's talk a little bit about what has led up so far to this season.
So Georgia's coming off a 45-3 beat down.
But didn't cover.
Didn't even cover the other early number of 42.5, much less the late number. I think it went off at 46 or something like that. So,
well, all they had to do was score in two of the other two quarters that they didn't score in to cover.
31 points in the second quarter, 14 points in the third quarter, 0 points in the first quarter, 0 points in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, they didn't score a touchdown until the second quarter when Muse took that 69-yard punt return back to the house. But before that, they had 0 offensive touchdowns.
Well, last year they were on this trend of a little bit of a slow start. I remember comparing them to the old Alabama days when Alabama was everybody always said second half team. Georgia had a little bit of that last year, and this last week against Ball State, luckily Muse has been quite a spark plug and led us off with a punt return for a touchdown, and that kind of fired everybody up. After that, it was lights out for the next 15 minutes.
Well, we talked about this in our sister podcast, Stay in the Truck. At first, everybody's like, oh, Georgia, they get a slow start. What's going to happen when they play somebody big? But you brought up a good point last week. We think it's by design, right? I mean, we don't think they'll come out and bust up these smaller schools and show all their cards right out the gate.
Jeff was talking about last week how they had 0 sacks. Well, we had 0 sacks, but we gave up pretty much 0 points the whole game, and then toward the end give up a field goal. I mean, I think it's just going to be against these small schools. Kirby doesn't want to give any. I mean, I've watched his press conferences this week. He wants to give nobody anything to work with. These press guys are coming at him with questions about the running backs and questions about the defensive backs and who's standing out and what do you look at in South Carolina. They're reaching for anything. Man, he is a king of aversion. Like, he just doesn't ever answer anything they really ask. And I think that's the way he designed those first two games. I mean, vanilla offense, vanilla defense. I bet you can go back and count the blitz packages in those two games on less than one hand.
So their defense right now is ranked 14th in Division I. They've given up 0 fumbles. They've had 4 interceptions. They're averaging giving up 5 points a game, which is 3rd in the country.
Yeah, did you see the interview with one of the South Carolina players earlier today or earlier this week? He was asked what is the most intimidating football stadium to play in the SEC, and he said Texas A&M in Tennessee, and then it cuts to Kirby, and he's at his press conference, and he says something to the effect of, all right, well, we can use that for motivation. We'll show him what kind of intimidating stadium he can come into. So he's calling the Dogs to get out there at 3:30. Yeah, I think we're going to dominate again.
Circa has now moved this number down to 27 and 53.5 on the total. So it opened, in a lot of places, it opened at 26.5, went up to 28. You had to lay some juice on that. But Circa's the sharpest book in the country, and they got Georgia 27.5. So they took some money on South Carolina.
Yeah, I mean, I would still. Yeah. I mean, I think Georgia's going to win. I think they're going to dominate the game physically. I think they're going to. I think Carson Beck's still got some growing to do. I like to get on him because his play hasn't had like what I would call curb appeal. You haven't watched him and been wowed by what he's done so far. Right. Yeah, I mean, but we have been playing some turds, but he's got 72% completion rate. Thrown for 3 touchdowns, had an interception on a bad throw in that first game. It was the first game where he had the jitters a little bit. But, all in all, I think that the team, even if he stutters against a good team and a decent defense, I don't have any doubt that those two guys playing behind him couldn't come in and get it done against South Carolina.
So Georgia's offense is ranked 14th in the nation with a scoring average of 46.5 points per game, and they're averaging 472.5 yards per outing right now. So
Carson had 283 last week, 23 for 30.
Yeah, just a
it's
solid.
Not wow.
Yeah,
but he averaged 9.5 yards a pass. I mean,
there was some downfield throws.
Brock Bowers only had 1 catch for 3 yards or something.
Yeah, he got the week off.
Yeah, I mean, he got the week off.
He's gonna carry the load a lot coming up. So
Dylan Bell though, how about him?
Dylan Bell is. Let's get that guy number 1 or 2 on that jersey and put him in the backfield. Even though he only carried the ball a couple of times. 3 carries for 28 yards. That guy was absolutely electric. I love watching the way he moved, the way he cuts. I liked his body control. just Dylan Bell, he caught 5 passes for another 48 yards. He's caught 5 this year for 48
he caught
yards.
2 for 16
But
last
2
week,
for 16 last week. But every time the ball is in this guy's hands, you feel like something could happen. It was like the old days when Sony Michel got the ball, and just the smallest crease could turn into something major. And I get that feeling with Dylan Bell, man. I think that this guy, I mean, he's a 200-plus pound, quote-unquote, receiver. I'd like to see him. I'd like to see him in the backfield a lot.
You think Kirby's going to put him in the backfield? Or?
But I think right now he don't really have that much of a choice, does he?
Well,
I mean, yes, he has a choice, but I mean...
Isn't DeJuan Edwards coming back this
he
week?
said.
Yeah, he said DeJuan Edwards could play last week, but he didn't want to play him at 90, 95, 98%. He said, we're trying to get everybody 100%.
Yeah, I've got the injury report right here for this game. Javon Bullard with an ankle is questionable. Raylan Wilson with a knee is probable. Ladd McConkey with his back is questionable. Kendall Milton hamstrings probable. Dejon Edwards knee is probable. So
so we'll use him if we have to.
Right.
That's what that's saying. Look, our rushing attack hasn't been great this year. We ran for 159 versus UT Martin. We ran for 99 versus Ball State.
But that's a little bit skewed because Gunner had minus 10 yards taking knees.
Right.
So, I mean, that's a little bit.
But I'll tell you about...
But still, you should have more than 110 yards rushing against Ball State, or you would think you should.
Yeah, 99 versus Ball State and 159 versus UT Martin. But still, we're averaging, $125 or so versus these two schools. But USC's got even worse rushing. They were -2 versus UNC, which I pulled that little nugget. Couldn't believe that. Yeah. Rushed for -2 yards versus UNC. They rushed for 108 versus Furman. They have no rushing game. I will say, I think Rattler is a better quarterback than Beck. That may be the only spot on the field where they are in a better position than we are.
South Carolina's running back to Carry-On Joyner, 25 carries, 65 yards, 2.8 average carry, and 2 touchdowns. So
South Carolina's ranked 128th in the nation right now for rushing, averaging 53 yards.
Yeah, I mean, in 2 games, they rushed for 108 yards. But to Josh's point about Rattler, he was the offensive player of the week in the SEC last week. 25 for 27, 345 yards, 3 touchdowns. He got a rushing touchdown. He accounted for 353 total yards and 4 touchdowns against Furman, which was a close game till right before halftime, and South Carolina started pulling away from him.
Yeah. Well, here's what scares me about Rattler is that he's mobile, and obviously with these vanilla defenses we've been playing against these Rudy Poo teams, we don't know really what our guys have. Sure. We don't know what our linebackers have and our defensive line has when they're going to have to get after it. Because Rattler's going to spread the play, and one of his biggest strengths is throwing downfield. He throws a great deep ball. He throws a good ball, 20-plus yards. And that's where we got hurt last year. Anybody that could throw a ball and make completions 20+ yards downfield is where we really got hurt last year.
But looking at their offense, I was looking at some of the injuries that South Carolina has.
Yeah, they're beat up pretty bad.
Offensive lineman Casey Henry out. Jalen Nichols and Ryan Burbaker's still out, hadn't played all year. Offensive lineman Jadarius Morgana left the game against Furman with his injury, and he's questionable. Offensive lineman Marquis Anderson is expected to make his season debut against that defensive line from Georgia. That is trouble.
Well, Juice Wells, who was supposed to just really help him out on the wide receiver spot, he's played one down for 5 yards.
Yep. Didn't play at all last week.
Right.
They gave up 9 sacks versus UNC.
65 yards.
9 sacks. I mean, that's just...
Well, that's Rattler. It's part terrible blocking, and it's part the fact that he wants to hit the home run ball, so he holds on to the ball too long.
Right.
Yeah, he holds the ball too long, puts himself in a position to have to run because he knows he can. But if these linebackers we've got show the speed that has been said that they have, then we'll put a stop to that real quick. He rolls out and somebody lights his ass up.
Put a quarterback spy on him. Keep your lanes. Keep them.
The one that they're going to have to defend is the wide receiver, Xavier Leggett. He's got 15 receptions this year, 300 yards. He averages 19.5 yards a reception, and he scored a touchdown. That is their, especially with nobody knows what Juice is going through. They don't know what Juice Wells is going to play. Is he hurt? Is he healthy? What's he doing? If that's the only one that Georgia has to worry about, and I mean, they do have Eddie Lewis. He's got 6 catches this year, 89 yards, but no touchdowns. So, and they're not worried about the running backs from South Carolina.
So South Carolina's offensive coordinator during the press conference told the guys that his offensive line is a work in progress.
Good luck.
And he said that a couple of times. This was after the loss to North Carolina, where they gave up, Josh mentioned 19 sacks and 16 tackles for a loss. And that's what North Carolina was only rushing 3 men, by the way.
And that's the North Carolina defense that we have not been high on at all. And their numbers are definitely skewed from playing that South Carolina game.
Yeah.
Because last week they caught hell with App State. That North Carolina defense did.
But I tell you, it was an exciting week last week to get a lot of those receivers involved, those new guys. And this is one of the first times that I feel like our receiving core is so strong that now the quarterback has to raise his game to match the ability. Like Ra Thomas had a couple catches last week, looked fantastic. Dominic Lovett looks unbelievable. I mean, I love the way he catches the ball. He made a great catch last week. He really
turned around from his first game, and maybe he was just a little nervous being the first game in Athens, but, he had a couple drops, seemed a little nervous.
After not dropping a single target
ever
in
college.
Yep.
Like you said, he was a rock star in the second game.
Rosemy Jackson, they got him involved. He got a touchdown.
He started getting his legs under him, got a couple passes in. Oscar Delp. Delp has been getting in the action. Like, the amount of guys that we have that are weapons, it's unbelievable. So if Bobo, I hope that a lot of the criticism for Bobo is because he has intentionally been calling these games very plain and very boring, and that he brings a few packages out and shows the fan base that he's not going to let everybody down, because there's a lot of doubt out there right now. And rightfully so.
Yeah. I mean, when you lose Monken like that, and that offense has been just on a rip for the last 2 years, and then you bring back Bobo, which when he was there with Aaron Murray and them, they averaged 42 points a game. It wasn't the offense that lost the games.
Right? Yeah. Look, he makes the play call, but the players make the plays, right?
We had Stetson man.
Yeah, exactly. We had Stetson Bennett running that offense. I mean, you got Stetson Bennett running this Bobo offense. Maybe he shines like a shooting star as well, right?
But he studied under Todd for a year or two. I mean, he got his time with Todd Monken. So
yeah. But the defense for South Carolina that we're sitting here talking about, all these offensive weapons that Beck has at his dispense. South Carolina is number 89 in total defense out of 133 teams after 2 games. Number 100 against the pass, giving up 256 yards average a game.
That doesn't read well. 4
touchdowns. They've got 3 interceptions, and they've got 3 sacks on the quarterback. Against the rush, they're number 69, giving up 125 yards a game, 3.5 yards per rush.
And they're beat up.
They're beat up. They're defensive injuries. Defensive end, Drew Tazama, he left the game against Furman. They don't know. Defensive back, Keon Nelson, he left the game against Furman. His status is unknown. The stud that they have, linebacker Debo Williams, he's already got 18 tackles this year. He's a stud. You're going to have to block him. Their defensive end that everybody was so, just gung-ho about after the spring game, Desmond Umazulu, he has done nothing this year.
And then the Syracuse transfer, JT Gear, I mean, he hasn't even played yet, has he?
No, and I don't know that he's going to get to play this week. So
what are they holding him out for?
Who knows? They're not going to tell us. Honestly, you look at this, like my number comes up, Georgia's favored by 26. Okay. But again, my numbers are very conservative, and they have not been worth a damn this year. To me, this might be a get-right game for Georgia on an accident. My prediction, 45-14 Georgia.
This is where I think it gets real, because it's a SEC conference game. It's a 3:30 game. They're playing in Athens. 81 degrees. The weather's going to be perfect for football. I don't think we're going to see the same Georgia team that we've watched the last 2 weeks, just because I think it's time for them to really get the season going the way that it should be.
Do you think they can just turn it on? Just bam, after playing UT Martin and Ball State?
I think they're going to be amped up, though. I mean, I think this is the first SEC opponent for this crew, and I think the kids are going to be fired up. I think they're going to be ready to rock and roll. I do think Rattler's going to get lucky enough to maybe possibly get a long score somewhere in the game, and then possibly drop a couple field goals in. I'm real close with you. I think 10 or 13 is going to be South Carolina's number. Now, I feel like Georgia's going to come in somewhere between 35 and 43. So it's
they'll win by 30.
Yeah.
What we're not talking about, though, this game has always been viewed as a rivalry. Whether the last couple of years results have shown that. I'll give you an example. Every year in Augusta, for the 30 past years, they have the Border Bash. And it's right there on the Savannah River, right at the state line, because it's celebrated as a rivalry. It's just like Clemson in Florida. They're still looked, in Georgia Tech, those always looked at rivalry teams. And so South Carolina, even though they're banged up, even though their defensive line has, pretty much sucked the first 2 weeks, they're going to show up at some. Maybe it's just the first half, but they're going to show up. These guys finished 23rd last year in the top 25. They beat Clemson. They also beat Tennessee, and they beat Kentucky last year. Probably not the same team, but Georgia can't sleep on them. So whether they can turn it on or turn it off,
I agree with you. They can't sleep on them. But I'm old, but I know when I was in school, it was no rivalry. Everybody knew we were going to win South Carolina. That was just a given back in those days. And then Rick came in, and
the first thing
we started
I think
to
about
lose occasionally. Then it seems like Kirby's got them turned right back around. Where
the David Pollock game. This is they were playing South Carolina when he strip sacked the quarterback and ran it in for the touchdown. That was like 02. I think about that every time I think about.
Yeah, that would have been right after I left. Yeah,
it was
02, something like that.
I mean, Georgia's won the last 8 out of 10 games.
Right.
So
look, the last 3 meetings, Georgia's outscored them 133-36.
Right.
Yeah. Beat them 48-7 last year in South Kakalaki. So
South Carolina's one of those teams that I don't hate them. I don't like them. They're just really kind of insignificant.
Yeah.
When Spurrier was there, and then they still kicked our ass because he kicked our ass at Florida, and then he came to South Carolina and somehow would have a shit team and still kick our ass. Then
Garcia beat Alabama too.
Well, then they were relevant, and I hated them, but mainly just because I hate Spurrier.
Yeah.
I mean, I love Spurrier as a football fan, but as a rivalry guy and a Georgia fan, he was always going to be a Florida Gator. But the thing I look forward to the most, and what I really want to see out of this game, is the press conference after. I want to see Coach Beamer stand up there just like he did a couple of years ago when they asked him what was going on with that Georgia defense, and he says, "What are you talking about? What's going on? They got 5 stars everywhere. They got 350-pound linemen running 4.5 40s. What are we supposed to do?" Or whatever he said. But that might have been one of the greatest press conferences I've ever seen by a losing coach.
Make sure the sideline judges aren't eating hot dogs this weekend.
So I got a couple of trends with this rivalry game. Georgia is 36-27 against the spread in all SEC play under Kirby Smart. Georgia's won the last 3 meetings against South Carolina by a score of 133-36. Georgia is 1-3 against the spread versus South Carolina when they're favored by 20 or more points.
Bodes well for betting South Carolina.
The total has gone over 7 out of the last 9 games between South Carolina and Georgia, and you're looking at 54.5 right now. I think that's what the total is at.
Yeah.
Georgia scored 40 plus points in the last 4 out of the last 5 games against South Carolina, and Kirby Smart is undefeated against all his former assistants. And Shane Beamer is a former assistant.
No shit.
So I don't know if that's going to change. Right. And then when you look at South Carolina's 3-12 against the spread in their last 15 SEC games, have not scored 30 points against the Bulldogs since 2014. Shane Beamer has lost to Georgia by an average margin of 34 points. Vegas has got the team total for South Carolina set at 14.5 for the game. So that tells you what they're thinking right there. It's not going to bode well.
I tell you, man, with this new clock thing, the way it's working right now, I just have a hard time betting the over on anything if it's over 50-something points.
See, I'm going over. I like South Carolina in the points. I think we beat them handily. I don't think we beat them by 27.5. I like the over at 54.5. Carolina's won 12 of the last 15 road games taking the over there. And UGA has gone over on 4 of the last 6 home games. So I like the over, but I don't like us covering. I've got us winning 41-18.
We'll see.
I have a hard time taking Georgia to cover anything, ever.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that if I pick a score, the score doesn't reflect me thinking that they're going to cover.
Right.
It's just not. But I still wouldn't bet it because I just don't feel comfortable with that bet. I'm looking at I think that we are not strong enough in the red zone. I think last year you could look at a game like this and you knew Stetson was going to find a way to punch it in for a touchdown. Yeah, I think right now that we're a 50-50 field goal team when it comes to the red zone. We're not scoring touchdowns in the red zone like we need to be.
And we might be 50-50 kicking the field goal.
Shit, no shit. So let's say you get a touchdown a quarter. It's 28. Maybe an extra touchdown thrown in there, or defensive scores 35 plus a couple of. I like 41. Is that what you said? 41.
Yep, 41-18.
I like that. I like that number. I like 41. I think that's a good number. 41 or 44.
I got 45-14.
So let's say 44. I don't think South Carolina's going to get 2 touchdowns.
I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt here.
44 to 13.
Listen, they have no offensive line, so I don't know what.
So I'm really thinking like 44 to 10.
Which
means I'm not going the over. You know,
Well, I can't.
But we got one sack. But again,
yeah, I mean, you might have a whole lot, but the two offensive lines y'all played is probably better than this one they got.
Are we saving our sack plays?
Well, I think they've just been doing what they needed to do. I think that there's not been a very aggressive
3-man rush pushing everybody back.
They're filling gaps, stopping the run.
Well, got a lot of guys playing. He's getting them in. They're getting the reps.
All the young guys are getting experience right now. They were getting some criticism about taking the foot off the gas, but what people don't understand is the developmental mindset of Kirby Smart, developing all these young players, getting them in there for a quarter and a half a game. That way, when these guys come in and this next group moves on, you're not bringing in a bunch of guys that haven't played. You're bringing in guys that played in every game.
Yep. Agreed. The
only difference is they're playing at the beginning instead of the end. But, I mean, it's game time, full speed experience.
Yep.
Georgia's averaging 46.5 points per game. I think they continue that. So, really, the question is, how many points does South Carolina score?
None.
If South Carolina – well, so then Georgia covers.
Yep.
Georgia covers.
Josh has got more guts than I got. I couldn't take the points. Again, the offensive line, UT Martin's and Ball State's offensive line might be better than what is about to line up against Georgia. And I'm not kidding. I mean, these guys they're crushed, man. There's five offensive linemen that probably aren't going to play. And they got one that's going to make his season debut. That is not good news for South Carolina fans.
Yeah.
Well,
I agree. I think Georgia covers. I don't think they cover the over, though.
This thing might be over at halftime. I mean, if you want to be honest about it, it might be over at halftime.
All right, guys. Well, that's our show for the week. We really appreciate you tuning in. Please remember to subscribe and to like. And go Dogs.